Hi everyone, I'm Katie Stanley and thank you so much for joining me on another virtual hike today. So I'm an assistant naturalist at the Latodami Nature Center here at North Park, and today we are going to hike along Irwin Run. So this is a beautiful little stretch of trail that goes along this really pretty meandering stream, and I chose this spot because today I want to talk about watersheds, our impact as humans on water quality, and some of those really interesting little creatures that live in our streams in Pennsylvania. So if you're ready to join me, come along and we'll go on a virtual Thursday hike together. So as I said, we are currently standing along Irwin Run, and I'm actually standing in Irwin Run's floodplain. So what is a floodplain? It's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's just an area of land adjacent to a stream that kind of absorbs all those floodwaters that occur during high storm or high rain event. So these floodplains are super important because all this vegetation and this soil helps filter out maybe those pollutants, those nutrients, and that sediment that might be carried in stormwater. So we kind of understand that when it rains, you might see along the side of a road as you're driving a little stream that forms and it's running downhill. Well, that eventually makes its way to water. And that water can carry a lot of nasty stuff in it. Maybe it has some fertilizers or some pesticides from our lawns or from our farms. Maybe it has some oil or some road salt from our roads. Maybe it's some sediment from a nearby development that's going on. But all that stuff eventually makes its way downhill, which leads to water. And that kind of helps me explain what a watershed is to you. So we all live in a watershed, which means that we all live in an area where any drop of water that falls eventually goes downhill and makes its way into a stream. So as I said, that's why this floodplain is really important. It helps filter out all that nasty stuff that might come from storm water. So by having this next to our bodies of water, not only do we prevent those really high floods that might impact some of our human infrastructure, but we also help keep our water healthy by filtering out all that stuff over here before it makes its way downstream. We know that all streams eventually meet rivers, which maybe flow into lakes and oceans. So by understanding what a watershed is, you can really understand your impact on a watershed or on a body of water, and understand what you do on your very own little piece of land, maybe your tiny little lawn, can actually have an impact on water that you like to recreate in. So we know that all the water, maybe those streams that we like to fish in, those rivers that we like to boat on, those lakes that we like to swim in, and even those oceans that we like to vacation to, can be impacted by our very own land uses. So now that you understand the positive effects of a floodplain, it's kind of important to understand what happens when we don't have a floodplain along a stream. So as humans, we love to settle near water, of course, because we know it's a source of drinking water and food and recreation. So we often find that we have roads built along rivers, or maybe we have developments or houses built along streams. And what happens is not only do we experience floods that impact human infrastructure because we're not allowing for this floodplain that allows that water to settle down, but we also see a lot more pollution entering our waterways. So when you have surfaces like asphalt and concrete and roofs, right, those things aren't made for water to trickle into. We don't want water trickling into the roofs of our houses. That's kind of the point. So because that water can't filter through that, it rushes off of those surfaces, and it rushes really quickly. And when that happens, it will pick up more pollutants along the way. It can lead to more and more erosion. And because there's no floodplain for that stuff to settle into, it just heads right for our water. So like I said, that leads to more pollutants, nutrients, and sediment entering our waterway. And I keep saying nutrients, and you might think, well, nutrients sound like a positive thing. But what I mean by that is those fertilizers, those things that we add to our plants, to our lawns to help our plants grow. Well, eventually they make our way into our water, and then they make our way into maybe a lake or an ocean, and that's when we see those crazy algal blooms like we've seen in Lake Erie. So if you have been to Lake Erie over the past couple summers, or if you've even turned on your TV, you may have seen these crazy toxic algal blooms that are causing beaches to close, and they're telling people not to go in the water because contact or ingestion of this algae can actually be very harmful or even deadly. So the reason that this happens is because Pennsylvania is an agricultural state, right? We're used to seeing our farms all over the place, but those farms love fertilizers, and so do we love fertilizers on our yards. So like I said, when we have a rain event, that stormwater carries that fertilizer over all those surfaces that don't allow that water to trickle through, and it brings it into our lakes and our oceans, and it leads to something called eutrophication. So all these nutrients build up on the surface of those lakes and those oceans, and the algae is like, yes, this is a perfect opportunity. I have all the nutrients I need. I'm gonna grow like crazy. So you see all this algae bloom. Not all of it is toxic. Some species are. But what happens is it covers the top of the water column, and then it eventually dies, and it sinks down and it decays. And during its decomposition, it uses up oxygen, and it can lead to anoxic water condition. So that means water without oxygen. And just like humans, fish need oxygen to survive. So you might see fish kill. You might see an area where there's fish washing up on the beach and they're dead, and that is due to these stormwater issues. It's due to us adding way too much fertilizer to our lawns and to our farms, which then runs into our recreation areas and closes beaches for us. So it's kind of important to understand that what you're doing on your lawn does have a direct impact, and this stuff will continue to happen in the future as we increase our development and increase our use and normalization of fertilizers. So that's why I encourage you to limit your use of things like that, so that we can continue to enjoy these beautiful waterways and not have to close them down due to toxic algal blooms and eutrophication. Now that we've talked about all the crazy impacts that humans have on our waterways, let's give you another reason to care about them. So we know there are so many gorgeous species of birds and fish and even some interesting mammals that live in our Pennsylvania waterways. But what a lot of people don't know is the base of the food chain. So there's these really cool things called macroinvertebrates. So a macroinvertebrate, we'll break down that word. Macro means it's large enough to see with the naked eye. So as opposed to like a microscopic animal, something you need a microscope to look at. An invertebrate means it doesn't have a backbone. So a macroinvertebrate, they're these tiny little critters that live in the bottom of our streams. And like I said, they're the base of the food chain. So they're an awesome food source for things like fish and birds and even some of those mammals. And what they do is they help break down a lot of that plant and animal matter that might be in our streams. So they're really important for the food chain and helping it operate. But they're also really fun because you can look for them in your waterways just by picking up rocks and finding some of these really cool little critters. So let's take a look and see if we can find anything cool. So these macroinvertebrates are actually the larval stages of those flies that we're really used to seeing in aquatic environments. So like our dragonflies, our mayflies, our caddisflies, they actually start their lives by living underwater. They start as aquatic insects. So it's really cool because they look totally different, and their lives underwater may actually last longer than their lives above the water in their adult form. So I've actually picked up a rock and I have found a caddisfly larva. So caddisfly are really cool because what they do is they camouflage themselves by hiding underneath of tiny little rocks. So if I were to move these rocks, I would actually find the larva of the caddisfly hiding under here. And he does that because, like I said, fish love to eat these guys. Fish have been known to jump as far as 2 feet out of the water to try to catch those adult forms of the caddisfly. And that's what fly fishermen do. So by doing that little movement, they're mimicking the larval stage hatching into the adult stage of those flies. So this caddisfly, he's hiding until that day when he can hatch out into his adult form. So that's him hiding right underneath these rocks right here. And their adult life actually only lasts for about 2 weeks. So they'll stay in this larval stage for 2 to 3 years, and then they'll hatch and they'll become an adult, and they only live for 2 weeks as an adult. So because of that, they have really simple mouth parts, and they can really only suck the nectar of different plants. So basically their only purpose in life is to reproduce once they become adults. So it's pretty cool to see them in this stage and also once they hatch into their adult form. So here we have found a mayfly larva, and that's really exciting because mayflies are actually one of the positive water quality indicators. So mayfly cannot live in waters with pollution in them. They're not like those black fly larvae or those leeches that really don't mind the pollution. They are ones that will not tolerate it. So if you find a mayfly, you know that you have a pretty high quality stream right here. And these guys are known as mayflies. There's over 3,000 species, but one of those species does hatch out in May. So these are pretty cool because they emerge in these gigantic swarms, and people will navigate to the rivers when they know there's going to be an emergence because apparently it's pretty magical. So I've never seen it, but hopefully that's something I get to see soon. And these guys are interesting because they don't even have mouth parts. They will live in the water for 2 to 3 years, just like the caddisfly, but then they hatch out and they're only alive for 24 hours. So their sole purpose is to reproduce during that 24 hours, and then they just die. So they don't even need to eat because that's all their they're focused on. So there are some species that will actually live only 5 minutes in their adult form. So like I said, if you find one of these guys, you know you have a pretty healthy stream. As I was saying before, sediment is one of the really large polluters, and you may wonder why sediment. It's just dirt, it doesn't really cause any issues. Well, it's actually the largest polluter of streams in Pennsylvania. And the reason that sediment is an issue is because of these really cool little macroinvertebrates I just showed you. So these guys, as you can see, love to hang out in the bottom of the stream. They make their homes on the undersides of rocks, but when sediment starts to flow in, it fills in all those crevices and it suffocates these guys. So it would be just like us trying to walk around and breathe in a sandstorm. If you've ever been in a sandstorm, you know they kind of tell you to go inside, shelter, and cover your face, because if you breathe that stuff, you can suffocate. So that's exactly what happens when we start introducing too much sediment into our waterways and kind of just suffocating our little macroinvertebrates. So that's another reason that it's really important that we maintain big trees in our yard, maybe some native plants to help limit that erosion, and even try to encourage developments to make sure that they're following correct practices to limit the amount of sediment that's coming off the properties and eventually making its way into our waterways. Hopefully you guys have a little better understanding of your impact on your waterways and how much of a difference you can really make in the landscape. So I encourage you to limit or eliminate your use of fertilizers, to maintain those native plants, shrubs, and trees on your property to prevent erosion, and encourage other people to do so. Just by clicking on this video, I know that you already are an awesome environmental steward, and hopefully you can share it and encourage some other people to do the same. So let's support these little guys that live in our streams so we can keep our waterways healthy for years to come. And thank you guys so much for joining me again today. I'll see you next time.